I'm Raymond Knox, a 42-year-old auto shop owner who has never been embarrassed of my blue-collar hands. These hands wiped grease from the dreams of first-time drivers and lifelong commuters, tuned suspensions, and rebuilt engines. I took pride in that genuine pride until that Thanksgiving when pride had to swallow the hard lump of humiliation. That day taught me something fresh. Shame doesn't always result from failure. Sometimes it is given to you like a paper plate, light, flimsy, and meant to carry weight. It was never designed to hold. My wife Clarissa had always tried to maintain a particular boundary between my world and hers. I ignored the little indications for years. The polite corrections when I said, "ain't," in front of her father, the way she always recommended I wear the one blazer I owned every time we visited her family, thought she was just trying to help me fit in. What I didn't see was that she was attempting to make me invisible. This year, her sister Jenna was hosting Thanksgiving at her sprawling, perfectly curated estate in Chestnut Hill, the kind of place where napkin rings had heirlooms and hors required pronunciation guides. Driven in my old Chevy Silverado, cleaned, polished, still too loud for Clarissa's taste, to a place where napkin rings had legacies and hors required pronunciation guides, our children Ari and Miles were in the back seat attempting to guess how many pies would be served. I had joked, hopefully more than the number of insults I'll get this time. Clarissa didn't laugh as we entered the warmth of the house, which was only surface-level big smiles, fast air kisses, and a chorus of "so glad you could make it," but beneath the chill was evident I wasn't one of them. I never was. Clarissa vanished into the kitchen with her mother and sisters, their voices rising in harmonic judgment. I assisted Ari and Miles in hanging their coats, told them to go say hello to their cousins, and made my way to the dining room. Jenna caught me then, her smile sharp as glass. "Oh, Ray," she said with that sing-song voice that always felt like a pat on the head, "we actually have a nice little setup for you in the garage." I blinked. "The garage," she chuckled. "You know, more your vibe. We thought it'd be cozier, less formal. The kids can join you too, of course. Just loud enough for the room to hear he's a mechanic he's used to scraps," she added. Real laughter followed, not the kind you fake for politeness. They minted it, they thought it was funny, and none of them intervened to stop it. Holding 2 pie tins and a bottle of ginger ale like some hired help who overstayed his welcome, I looked around the room. Clarissa had heard. I could tell from the way her hand paused at the wine bottle, but she didn't turn, speak, or move. I clenched my jaw. I could have said something. I could have caused a scene, but then Ari appeared next to me, her large brown eyes searching mine. "Pat on the head, we've actually got a nice little setup for you in the garage." I blinked. "The garage," she laughed. "You know, more your vibe. We figured it'd be cozier, less formal. The kids can join you too, of course." Then she added, "just loud enough for the room to hear he's a mechanic he's used to scraps." Laughter followed, real laughter, not the kind you fake for politeness. They minted they thought it was funny, and none of them stepped in to stop it. I stood there holding 2 pie tins and a bottle of ginger ale like some hired help who overstayed his welcome. I looked across the room. Clarissa had heard. I saw it in the way her hand paused at the wine bottle, but she didn't turn, didn't speak, didn't move. I clenched my jaw. I could have said something. I could have made a scene, but then Ari appeared beside me, her wide brown eyes searching mine. Miles trailed closely behind, dragging a folding chair behind him as if it were punishment, trying to grasp, "Is it really in the garage, Dad?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, bud, it is." He appeared perplexed. "But why?" I crouched down and touched his shoulder, placing the food on the floor, since sometimes people don't know where to put you when they don't understand you. "But it's all right. You and I make anywhere feel like home." That smile I forced almost split my face in two, but I made it stick for them, for my children. Jenna led us to the garage. She opened the side door as if doing me a favor. Inside, the odor of gasoline and paint thinner hit us in the face. A folding table covered in a mismatched plastic cloth sat off to one side. The only seats were 2 rusty chairs and a milk crate. No candles, no warmth, just silence and oil stains. They set our paper plates down. The turkey was dry, the beans came from a can, no gravy, no sides, and no one came to check on us. Ari sat silently. Miles poked at his food, more concerned with a stray bolt on the floor than the meal in front of him. I sat there with a flimsy plate in one hand, trying to remind myself I wasn't a child again, that I wasn't back in my father's shed being told I would never be good enough for a better life. But then I looked at my children and saw how they tried not to cry, how they looked toward the house hoping their mother would come, that someone would say this was only a mistake, that it wasn't intentional, but it was. Every silent decision, every misplaced laugh, every plate not set at the main table meant it. I sat there with a flimsy plate in one hand, trying to remind myself I wasn't a child again, that I wasn't back in my father's shed being told I'd never be good enough for a better life. But then I looked at my children and saw how they tried not to cry, how they looked toward the house hoping their mother would come, that someone would say this was only a mistake, that it wasn't intentional but it was. Every silent choice, every misplaced laugh, every plate not set at the main table meant it. Table and something in me broke, not rage, not even sadness, but resolve. Since I'd been thankful for scraps long enough, the garage reeked of old regrets, gasoline rust, and the sharp bitterness of being forgotten. I sat on a creaky metal chair, wobbling with each weight shift. The folding table wobbled too, its plastic cover smeared with some kind of floral print, attempting too hard to be festive. There were no placemats, no candles, no music, just 3 paper plates of lukewarm food and the echo of laughter spilling from the house. That Ari sat across from me, eyes blank, fork untouched. She wasn't looking at me or the food, she just stared into some invisible spot on the wall behind me. I recognized that look. It was the same one I used to wear at her age, when my own father's silences were louder than his fists. She wasn't angry, she was ashamed, and worse, she was trying not to let me see it, trying to protect me. Miles, 13, was poking the beans on his plate with a plastic fork like a sword, humming quietly, a little off-key tune I didn't recognize, probably just trying to keep from crying. No child should have to pretend this was acceptable. I picked up my own fork and took a bite of turkey, dry and flavorless, feeling like sawdust in my mouth. Even the cranberry sauce had a rubbery texture, as if it came from a can 2 Thanksgivings ago. I chewed slowly and set the fork down. I wasn't hungry, not for food anyway. "Ari," I said, keeping my voice calm and gentle, "are you all right?" She blinked out of her trance and looked at me. "Yeah." I tilted my head. Something quietly, a little off-key tune I didn't recognize, probably just trying to keep from crying. He was 10, no kid should have to pretend like this was okay. I picked up my own fork and took a bite of turkey, dry, flavorless. It felt like sawdust in my mouth. Even the cranberry sauce had a rubbery texture, like it came out of a can 2 Thanksgivings ago. I chewed slowly, then set the fork down. "I wasn't hungry, not for food anyway, Ari," I said, keeping my voice calm, gentle. "You all right?" She blinked out of her trance and looked at me. "Yeah." I tilted my head. "That was too quick," she said, then shrugged. "I'm used to it." That cut deeper than anything Jenna had said before. "Used to what, baby?" She shot me a look I'll never forget. "You're nothing, like we're a joke." Miles stopped poking his beans and folded his hands in his lap. It was then that I realized this wasn't just a bad Thanksgiving. It was their story now, a memory that would haunt them every holiday season. I despised it. I hated that I hadn't seen how far things had deteriorated until I saw it. Looking through their eyes, I softly said, "I'm not a joke, more to myself than anyone else." Ari nodded as if she, too, needed to believe that. "No," she said, "you're not, but they treat you like you don't matter." I turned toward the little filthy window framing the rear of the house. Inside, I could see Clarissa laughing with a wine glass in her hand, her face aglow in discussion. Her mother was right next to her. Jenna was leaning against the counter, recounting the same tale she always told about being invited to the governor's fundraiser. The room was golden and glowing. Warm, and none of it reached us. Clarissa hadn't come to check on us, not once. I tried not to let the anger rise, tried not to imagine standing in the middle of that perfect dining room and asking loud and clear why the hell they thought it was okay to exile me, like I didn't belong. But what would have been the point? They didn't just exclude me, they erased me. Miles spoke up suddenly. "Do we have to stay the whole time?" I looked down at him. "You want to leave?" He nodded. "It doesn't feel like Thanksgiving. It feels like a punishment." That struck me square in the chest, since he was correct. This wasn't family, this wasn't celebration, this was exile dressed up in good intentions and hors d'oeuvres. They hadn't said get out, but they didn't have to. Every choice regarding our seating, our meal, and our welcome made it obvious where I stood. Slowly, the chair groaning under me as it scraped the concrete floor. "All right, let's go," Ari said, looking up in confusion. "Go where?" "Anywhere but here." They didn't ask again. Miles took his coat and Ari took up the still untouched pie we brought. I covered the foil. At least those were made with genuine love from home. As we stepped out into the driveway, the night air slapped my face like a dare. The house was still lit up, still loud, still buzzing with the kind of energy that always said, "We're doing just fine without you." And for the first time I believed them. They were fine without me. They had no intention of including me, not as a man, not as a father, and surely not as part of their family, but that was their problem now. I helped Miles into his seat in the truck and I turned to Ari and asked, "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm glad we're leaving." "Me too." I closed the truck door and glanced back at the house, the place where my marriage had quietly, slowly, and agonizingly told me I wasn't enough. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something I liked: conviction. We drove away from the mansion with 3 untouched plates, a pie no one cared to taste, and a truth that would carry us farther than I ever imagined. It wasn't about where we sat, it was about where we never would again. That would take us farther than I ever thought. It wasn't about where we sat, but rather about where we never would again. I was just about to scrape our untouched food into the trash when the driveway lit up like a movie set, headlights low, smooth, unfamiliar, crawling across the gravel, cutting through the thick silence outside the garage. My first thought was that someone had called a cab. Perhaps one of Clarissa's cousins had too much wine and decided to cut the night short. But then I saw the silhouette of the car. Long, sleek, not the sort you call on impulse. It was a limousine. My first reaction was bewilderment. My second was caution. I moved in front of Ari, and Miles' hand automatically reaching toward the toolbox in the corner, because that's what men like me are trained to do. When something unexpected shows up, we don't run, we protect. Inside the house, I saw movement, faces turned toward the window. Clarissa was standing near the fireplace, now wine glass frozen halfway to her mouth. Jenna leaned toward the glass like it was a screen showing a scene. The limo passed the front door slowly and deliberately, as if searching. It then turned toward the garage, causing my stomach to clench. The engine cut with a soft growl, no dramatic rev, just a clean stop, then silence. A soft click broke the stillness as the back door of the limo opened. A man stepped out, tall, sharp lines, clean-shaven, in a tailored gray coat that probably cost more than my truck. His shoes didn't belong on gravel, but he walked with purpose, as if he didn't care what they stepped in. He glanced around quickly before focusing on me. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but sharp like a knife. "I'm looking for the owner of this house." My first instinct was to point back at the mansion. "That would be the Hartwells," I said, pointing toward the glowing windows. He tilted his head and took out a folder. "Thick legal official." "No, I mean the legal owner. Raymond Knox." My name struck me like a punch I hadn't prepared for. "I'm Raymond Knox," I said slowly, wiping my hands on a rag tucked into my back pocket. My child stood behind me, still silent, trying to determine whether this was good or bad. He extended his hand with a firm grip. "Silas Byrne," he said, "Private Acquisitions Executive. I apologize for the unannounced visit, but it was important." Clarissa's family was fully pressed against the windows now, faces like portraits, mouth slightly open, eyes narrowed. Jenna whispered something to her husband, who appeared just as confused. Clarissa herself had stepped back from the glass, arms crossed, trying to remain composed. "What's this about?" I inquired, still uncertain whether this was real or some elaborate misunderstanding. Silas opened the folder. "Your patent filing," he said, flipping to a page with diagrams I had hand-drawn months ago. "The Sustainable Combustion Retrofit Kit. We've been reviewing your proposal for the last 2 quarters quietly as requested in your application." I blinked. "Wait, you actually read that?" He smiled slightly. "Not only did we read it, we—" Still uncertain whether this was genuine or some elaborate mix-up, I inquired, "What's this about?" as Clarissa herself had stepped back from the glass with arms crossed, attempting to remain calm. Silas opened the folder and said, "Your patent filing," flipping to a page with diagrams I had hand-drawn months before. "The Sustainable Combustion Retrofit Kit. We've been reviewing your proposal for the last 2 quarters quietly as requested in your application." I blinked. "Wait, you actually read that?" He gave a small smile. "Not only did we read it, we tested it. The emissions reductions are staggering. It's potentially revolutionary, which is why we're ready to invest." I could feel the heat from the garage's overhead light suddenly change. My heart was pounding. I looked at the folder, my name printed on the documents, the blueprints that I'd submitted under my own tiny LLC. I had done that at night after work when the shop was closed and the kids were asleep. I never told Clarissa. She never asked. It wasn't a secret. It was just mine. "I'm sorry," my voice catching. "I thought you'd—" I never heard back. "We were vetting it," he said, "and we believe your design could upset combustion engineering for retrofit sectors. Frankly, we want to be on the front end of that disturbance. My company is ready to license your technology and give you a seat on the innovation board." Ari gasped. Miles looked up at me as though I had sprouted wings from inside the house. I could see a flurry of activity now, Clarissa stepping away from the group. Her father's expression twisted into something unreadable. Jenna, mouth open, Hand on her chest. Open hand on her chest. None of them knew what was happening, and it was wonderful. You're sure you have the correct Raymond Knox? I asked with a grin. Part of me, still shocked. We're very sure. Silas said. We've already booked hotel accommodations downtown for tonight. We assumed you might choose not to stay here. Once the news broke, I laughed. I couldn't help it. For the first time in hours, it wasn't forced. It came from a place deeper than humor. It came from relief, from validation, from a recognition I'd stopped expecting behind. Miles murmured, "Dad, are you famous now?" I crouched beside him. "Nobody." But someone finally realized I mattered. I stood and faced Silas again. "Let me grab our things." He nodded, already stepping aside to open the limo door, and as I turned toward the house, I met Clarissa's eyes through the window. Everything had just shifted, and she knew it. I had barely taken a step before Clarissa came storming out of the house, her heels clicking against the stone pathway like an alarm bell. She clutched her cardigan around herself like it was armor, face pale but trying hard to piece together something like control. Her eyes flicked from me to Silence, to the limousine, then back to me. "Ray," she murmured, her voice low and anxious. "What's going on?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I turned to Ari and Miles and signaled for them to wait by the car as I collected our belongings. They nodded, still wide-eyed but quiet. They didn't need to hear what I was about to say. Not all of it. Clarissa stepped in front of me again, forcing eye contact. Tone measured, professional but definitely strong. "Mrs. Hartwell Knox," he corrected after looking down at his folder. "I'm here on behalf of my company to talk about a licensing agreement with Mr. Knox, the inventor of the retrofitted sustainable combustion kit. Your family's house is now deeded under. According to registration, ownership is in his name only." Clarissa appeared to have just swallowed a mouthful of thumbtacks. "What are you talking about? You never asked whose name the deed was in. You just assumed it was yours or your family's when your parents offered to help with the down payment." I said no, remember? "I paid for this house, Clarissa, every square foot of it, with money from the shop. But you never said anything because you didn't care to." "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "You were too busy trying to shrink me to fit into your world." Behind her, more of the family began to trickle outside. Jenna was first, arms crossed tightly, her husband trailing behind. Then came her parents, standing off to the side with expressions like they were watching a dog walk on two legs. Clarissa's father looked almost offended by Silas's presence, like a tailored coat couldn't possibly belong to someone dealing with me. "What's this about patents and licensing?" Clarissa asked, turning to Silas. Opened another section of the folder. "Mr. Knox submitted a patented design through a private firm 3 years ago. We've been monitoring its development, performance testing the prototypes, and calculating its market potential. As of this month, we've decided to move forward with a full-scale investment and licensing partnership. We'll be acquiring the rights under a structured agreement, and Mr. Knox will also be joining our innovation board as an executive consultant." Jenna snorted. "Wait, him? Are you serious?" Silas didn't flinch, dead serious. Her mother stepped closer. "But he's a mechanic." I turned to her, a wry smile tugging at my lips. "Yeah, one who builds things, not just fixes them." Clarissa's father finally spoke. "Why didn't you ever mention this?" I shrugged. "Because you never saw me pass the dirt on my hands. I stopped trying to explain myself years ago." Clarissa moved toward me, her voice softer now. "A little too late, Ray. I didn't know." "No, you didn't." I cut in. "Because it was easier to pretend I was just the help, the man you brought out for photos and tucked away when—" "Ray, can we at least talk?" Clarissa said, extending for my arm. "For my arm? Ray, can we at least talk?" I looked down at her hand and then up at her face. The mascara was beginning to run a bit under her eyes. She was now frightened, not of losing me, but of what this signified. What it exposed, the lie they had all been comfortably living around, the man they had underestimated, who had stopped waiting for their permission. I gently pulled my arm away. "We could have talked years ago when I asked you to see me. You made your choice." This I motioned around the driveway at her family, the tension in their glares, the pity in their "This isn't new, it's just finally visible." Silence. Miles ran up, tugging my hand. Ari followed, head held high. I opened the limo door and helped them in, handing the pie over to the driver. "Don't let this go to waste," I said. "It's the only thing in that house made with love." Looking one last time at the house I had paid for but never felt at home in, I got in beside my children and saw at the exact moment Clarissa realized the power had shifted, not because I yelled but because I no longer needed her. The limo pulled away from the mansion. Through the tinted windows I watched the house shrink in the rear-view mirror, a sterile monument to status and showmanship, like a last sentence to a long, ugly chapter. Clarissa and her family stood on the porch, frozen. Jenna still had her arms crossed, her face contorted somewhere between disbelief and anger. Clarissa's parents looked like they were watching a scandal unfold on live television, and Clarissa herself was just standing there, finally mercifully speechless, not crying or shouting. Back in the seat, the soft leather wrapping around my shoulders like something I didn't know I needed, Ari sat beside me silent but alert, his eyes darting across the car's interior soaking in every detail. Miles had already kicked off his shoes and was fiddling with the touchscreen panel on the side door. "Dad," he whispered, "there's a button for snacks." I smiled. "You hungry?" I knew I had made the right decision leaving when I saw my children coming back to life one snack at a time. They had only ever known one version of me, the man who came home with oil under his nails and stories about cheap spark plugs and obstinate engines. They had seen the shop-ridden shotgun in the tow truck, watched me fall asleep on the couch with invoices in my lap, and never knew the other life I lived once they were in bed, the part one never shared because no one asked, not even Clarissa. They had seen the shop-ridden shotgun in the tow truck, watched me fall asleep on the couch with invoices in my lap, and never knew the other life I lived once they were in bed, the part one never shared because no one asked, not even Clarissa. 3 years ago, I began staying up late after work, after dinner, after homework checks and bedtime stories. I would return to the garage with a sketchpad and a mug of coffee, that garage where they attempted to exile me. My invention was born there. The retrofit kit was not only about cleaner emissions, it was also about giving old engines new life. It was about taking something people discarded and proving it still had power. I started with old blueprints from a busted carburetor system, built prototypes from scrap parts and a 3D printer I bought off a retired engineer down in Trenton, ran simulations, recalibrated failed parts, rebuilt again and again, and spent nights online in niche forums asking questions, reading white papers, and learning the science I missed in school. I wasn't trying to be a genius. I was just obsessed with cleaner emissions. It was about giving old engines new life. It was about taking something people discarded and proving it still had power. I started with old blueprints from a busted carburetor system. I built prototypes from scrap parts and a 3D printer I bought off a retired engineer down in Trenton. I ran simulations, recalibrated, failed, rebuilt again and again. I spent nights online in niche forums asking questions, reading white papers, learning the science I didn't get in school. I wasn't trying to be a genius. I was just obsessed with solving a problem. One night after my 15th rebuild, I took my own truck out for a test run. It ran quieter, smoother, the exhaust smelled cleaner, less acidic. I knew I had something. That's when I started the paperwork, registered a business in my name, Knox Torque Innovations, filed the patent under that same LLC. I didn't tell Clarissa, not because I was hiding it, but because I knew what she'd say. "That's cute, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why waste time on something that won't scale?" Her world didn't make space for dreams. I stopped asking her to make room unless they came with LinkedIn endorsements and dinner parties. But Silas found me not via the garage, the shop, or even Clarissa's last name. He found me via a niche patent forum I posted on 9 months ago, offering to license a single schematic to anyone who could advance it. The CEO of his company, it turns out, came across it during a deep dive on sustainable mechanics. They traced the filing, conducted the research, located me, and now I was here in a limo with my children on the way to a hotel I hadn't booked, holding a folder confirming the world valued something I created with second-hand tools and grease-stained hands. I was holding a folder confirming the world saw value in something I created with grease-stained hands and second-hand tools on the way to a hotel I hadn't booked. Ari turned to me abruptly and asked, "Why didn't you tell us about the invention?" I exhaled slowly. "Because I didn't want to promise something I couldn't deliver. I wanted it to be real before I put it in your hands." She stared at me for a moment and said, "It is real and it's kind of amazing." Miles grinned, his mouth full of peanut butter crackers. "You're like Iron Man but with tools." I chuckled, the sound vibrating something loose in my chest. "Something loose in my chest, let's maybe not get that far." "No," Ari said, "he's right. They tried to act like you were nothing, but you were building something they couldn't even imagine, and now they don't know what to do with it." That stayed with me because she was right. Clarissa's family spent years ignoring what they couldn't define. I wasn't Ivy League, didn't come from generational wealth, didn't care about the right wine or the right watch, but while they were polishing their crystal, I was rebuilding the future under a flickering garage light. The limo pulled into the city, the skyline glowing ahead like a promise. We passed streetlights and stores, office towers and old diners, and somewhere between the 6th red light and the 8th bite of Miles' crackers, I realized this wasn't just about a deal. This was about showing my kids that the world may ignore you, but that doesn't make you invisible. You can build your own place, even if it starts in a garage. The hotel lobby was hushed, warm, and smelling faintly of fresh leaves and polished marble. The Marlowe didn't scream. Wealth, it whispered it, the kind of place that didn't need to prove anything because its floors already gleamed with quiet confidence. Silas handed me a leather-bound folio at the front desk, our room keys tucked inside, an itinerary, and a personal note from the CEO. Mary and Tan, my children, looked around as though we had entered a dream, and to be honest, part of me felt like we had. Mr. Knox, the concierge, smiled. Your suite is ready. Welcome. We took the elevator to the 23rd floor. The suite was massive. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a view of the skyline. Ari walked slowly, as if trying to memorize it all before it vanished. Even a fireplace. Miles ran to test every light switch. I stood there for a long time, keys in hand, trying to decide what to feel. I was still standing there when Clarissa called. The name on my screen didn't startle me, but the hesitation before answering did. I had spent years taking her calls right away, no matter where I was or what I was doing. Today, I let it ring 4 times before picking up. "Hello, Ray." Her voice was low, shaken, but still that practiced softness she used when she didn't want to seem rattled. "Can we talk?" "We're talking." A pause. "Not like this." "Why not?" Stepping into the suite's kitchen and shutting the door behind me, I remarked, "This is the most you've listened to me in years." "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I didn't know you were working on something so significant that people actually cared. I didn't know you were successful." That word struck differently coming from her. It wasn't a compliment, but rather a correction. "I wasn't hiding it, Clarissa." I said. I was just weary of shouting into a room that kept lowering the volume. "You're my husband," she said, as if that were supposed to mean anything. "We should have been building together. Had we ever?" I asked, since, to my knowledge, you were constructing a life, and I was the part that didn't fit the aesthetic. Another pause. "I'm sorry," she said, as though trying to determine how deep the wound was so she could apply the appropriate-sized bandage. "But I had already bled out in that garage," paper plate in hand, while her family laughed as though my dignity were a party favor. "I'm not angry," I said at last. "I'm just done begging to be seen. That garage you all stuck me in? That's where I built the thing your friends are probably gossiping about right now. That's not fair." "Fair," I cut in. "You let them treat me like I was beneath them. You let your sister humiliate me in front of our children, and you didn't even check on us." She didn't answer. Silence hung over the call like a rope. Bandage, but I'd already bled out in that garage, paper plate in hand, while her family laughed like my dignity was a party favor. "I'm not angry," I said finally. "I'm just done begging to be seen. That garage you all stuck me in, that's where I built the thing your friends are probably gossiping about right now. That's not fair." "Fair," I cut in. "You let them treat me like I was beneath them. You let your sister humiliate me in front of our kids, and you didn't even check on us." She didn't respond. Silence stretched across the call like a rope. "Pulled tight, Ray," she said at last. "I want to correct this." I looked out the window at the skyline, city lights blinking like a Morse code. "I couldn't translate. Some things are broken. They're just built wrong from the start. But we're a family." "No, Clarissa," I said quietly. "We're a family because I showed up every day and held it together, and now I'm choosing to let go." She started to cry, or maybe pretend to. "I didn't wait to find out. I need to go," I said. "The kids are hungry, and for the first time today, they feel wanted." I hung up when I stepped. Ari was curled on the couch, a hotel robe wrapped around her shoulders, watching the city. Miles was on the balcony with a cup of hot cocoa from a minibar, his diminutive body silhouetted against the glass, making something swell in my breast. "You okay?" I inquired, approaching Ari, who nodded. "Did Mom say anything?" I hesitated. "She said sorry." Ari blinked. "Did you believe her?" I considered all the times I defended Clarissa to our children, rationalized her coldness, and justified her absence during crucial periods. I thought about how often I told them she loved us in her own way, only quieter. How often I told them she loved us in her own way, just quieter. "No," I said. "I don't think she's sorry for what she did. I think she's sorry she didn't see it coming." Ari nodded slowly. "I think so too." Later that night, after room service delivered actual food, steak, garlic, mashed potatoes, vegetables that didn't come from a can, Miles curled up on the bed beside me. The TV played quietly in the background, some superhero movie he loved. "Dad, yeah, but I don't want to go back there to that house." I looked down at him, at his honest little face, at the way he believed I could mend the broken elements of his world, and I knew I couldn't bring him back, not to the house, not to the woman who failed to protect him, not to the life where his father had to sit in a garage to be tolerated. "We won't," I said. "I promise." He smiled, then drifted off to sleep, and I sat there fully awake, watching my children breathe peacefully in a space where no one sneered, no one mocked, no one handed them shame on a paper plate. Clarissa's silence had said everything, and my silence from now on would say more. The next morning, the limo. When we emerged from the hotel, The limo was already waiting. Same driver, same smooth ride, but everything felt different. I wasn't just leaving a suite, I was stepping into a new life. I helped Miles into the back seat, his small backpack slung over one shoulder. Ari climbed in next to him, earbuds already in, but her eyes flicked up to meet mine. She didn't smile, not quite, but there was peace in her expression, a quiet kind I hadn't seen in a while. The driver closed the door behind us and we eased into city traffic. I didn't ask where we were going. I already knew Silas had set up a private tour of the company's innovation center just outside the city limits. It wasn't some glass tower downtown, but rather a converted warehouse restored brick by brick and buzzing with potential. My kind of place. As the buildings thinned out, we passed corner stores, intersections, and wide stretches of road flanked by factories and warehouses, the hum of the city fading behind us. That's when Ari leaned forward and inquired, "Are we ever going back to that house?" I saw her in the rearview mirror. Miles perked up and said, "No, we're not." "But our stuff is still there, some of it," I said. "But the things that matter most, our time, our peace, our dignity, those come with us." Ari crossed her arms, deep in thought. "Mom didn't even call last night." "She did," I said. "While you were watching that movie, she wants to talk about damage control." Ari raised an eyebrow. "You're your father's daughter, she wanted this life," I smirked. Ari went on, "The fancy name, the events, the money, but she never wanted you to have it, not unless you had to beg for it." Her words struck hard, and they were accurate. Clarissa had always needed to be the one with the power, the leverage. If I became too confident, she would remind me who wore the designer shoes in the family. If I worked more hours at the shop or got a good deal on a client's fleet service, she would bring up how it would have gone faster if I had a genuine business plan. But I never argued with her. I believed love meant letting some things slide. Not any longer. I turned back in my seat and faced them both. I spent too long considering if I worked harder they would accept me. But the reality is that no matter how clean I got my hands, I was never going to be clean enough for them since you work with cars. Worked harder they would accept me, but the reality is no matter how clean I got my hands, I was never going to be clean enough for them because you work with cars. Miles asked, frowning. "No," I said softly, "because they needed to feel better than me and being themselves wasn't enough." He nodded as though he understood more than a 10-year-old should. I despised that this lesson had been given to him so early, but maybe it was better now than when it could have cost him more later. We turned onto a long driveway lined with trees at the end of. At the end of it stood the Innovation Center, a broad 2-story industrial structure with black-paned windows and a straightforward steel sign burned Tech Labs, no gold letters, no fountains, just purpose. As we pulled in, I saw Silas standing near the entrance, hands in his coat pockets. When we stepped out, he welcomed us like we were old friends. "Welcome," he said with a nod to the lab team eager to meet you inside. We were led through rows of workbenches and test bays where engineers were huddled around engine blocks, diagnostic panels, and 3D printers buzzing in the background. People looked up when we walked by, not with judgment or forced politeness, but with curiosity and recognition. A woman in a blue work jacket came up to "Mr. Knox," she said, shaking my hand vigorously. "I'm Vera, lead mechanical designer. We've been reviewing your prototype. It's elegant, clean, smart design." It was the kind of compliment that would have meant everything to me once, and it still did, but not for the reasons it used to. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. We spent the next hour walking the floor, looking at expansion plans, meeting with a legal rep about the licensing terms. I kept Ari and Miles close. They belonged in this part of the journey too, not as accessories but as witnesses. When we stepped outside, the sun was beginning to lower in the sky. The driver opened the door again, but this time I didn't get in right away. I stood there staring down the long drive leading back to the city and beyond that to everything I thought I had to accept just to survive. That's when I saw them, Clarissa's parents' car pulling up slowly at the curb. Her father stepped. Plans meeting with a legal representative regarding the licensing terms. I kept Ari and Miles close. They belonged in this part of the journey too, not as accessories but as witnesses. When we stepped outside, the sun was beginning to lower in the sky. The driver opened the door again, but this time I didn't get in right away. I stood there gazing down the long drive leading back to the city and beyond that to everything I believed I had to accept just to survive. That's when I spotted them, Clarissa's parents' car pulling up slowly at the curb. Her father stepped. Out first was her father, followed by her mother. They stood there unsure, watching Clarissa rather than walking toward us. Ari noticed them as well. She gently squeezed my hand and said, Don't, I'm not. I said I had already left and meant it. We entered the limo, the doors closing with a soft final click. Miles looked up from the snack drawer once more. So, are we wealthy now? I grinned. Not yet, but we're free, which is better. The limo pulled back onto the road. The lab faded from view through the window, but the impression it left remained since. Once people finally see you, really see you, there's no going back to being invisible, not ever again. The next evening Silas set up dinner with Marion Tan, the CEO of the firm that had just flipped my world upside down. I'd seen her name at the bottom of the licensing agreement, her signature in bold ink, but I hadn't yet seen the woman behind the empire. According to Silas, she built her company from the ground up, starting with a single patent, a borrowed workspace, and a second-hand laptop in a Brooklyn walk-up. He said she was brilliant, tough in negotiations, but very respectful of creators. She didn't buy ideas, she worked with people. We got to the restaurant just after 7 o'clock. It wasn't a glitzy place, no white tablecloths or valet service. It was tucked on a quiet street corner downtown, all dark wood and soft jazz playing low through speakers embedded in the walls. I liked it right away. Ari and Miles came with me. Marion insisted if your children were there when no one saw you, she said through silence they should be there when the world finally wakes up. The hostess led us to a private room near the back where a wide table sat under soft pinant light. Marion was already there, seated, sipping something dark from a short glass. She stood as we entered. "Mr. Knox," she said with a firm, confident voice and an extended hand, "it's about time we met." I shook it. Her grip was strong. "Call me Ray," I said, turning to Ari and Miles. "And these are the real bosses, I take it." Marion laughed as she turned to Ari and Miles. Ari smiled politely, and Miles grinned broadly. "This place smells pricey," he said quietly. Marion chuckled. "That's because it is, but tonight it's yours." We sat down, and the waitress brought menus, but Marion waved hers off. "I've eaten here 100 times. I just tell them to surprise me," she said, folding her hands on the table and looking at me as if she had already read 100 pages of my story and was deciding whether to invest in the sequel. "Ray," she said, "I read your blueprint twice, and I have a lab full of very smart people who read it 5 more times each. They're impressed, but more than that, they're curious. How did you come up with this retrofit system on your own?" I sipped my water, buying a moment. "I work with engines all day, see what wears down, what fails, what lasts. After a while, you start thinking about how to do more with less. I wasn't trying to reinvent anything, I just wanted to make something better." She leaned forward. "That's where all the good stuff comes from. Necessity, frustration, and a little bit of obsession. I've got plenty of that. Very clever people who read it 5 more times each. They are impressed, but more than that they are interested. How did you create this retrofit system on your own?" I sip my water, buying a moment. "I work with engines all day, see what wears down, what fails, what lasts. After a while you start thinking about how to do more with less. I wasn't trying to reinvent anything, I just wanted to make something better." She leaned forward. "That's where all the good stuff comes from. Necessity, frustration, and a little bit of obsession. I've got plenty of that," I said, and she grinned. For the following hour, we discussed technology, market disruption, and what I intended to do with the licensing money. I told her I didn't want a penthouse or a Ferrari. Rather, I wanted to grow my shop, employ apprentices, and create a mentorship program for children who enjoyed machines but didn't see college in their future. She nodded as if she already knew. Perhaps she did. Ari surprised me by joining the discussion. My father constructed the first version of his kit in our garage. He had this enormous whiteboard covered in formulas and parts numbers and coffee stains all over. It looked like chaos, but it wasn't. It was like a secret code only he could read. Parts numbers and coffee stains everywhere. It looked like chaos, but it wasn't. It was like a secret code only he could read. Marion turned to her. "Sounds like he had a good assistant." Ari smiled fully this time. "He didn't need one, he just needed people to stop underestimating him." Marion raised her glass. "To people like your dad, quiet builders, loud results." We toasted with water and orange juice. Even Miles joined in, clinking his glass with exaggerated ceremony. When dinner came, it wasn't fancy, just damn good roast chicken warm. "We're putting your name on this, Ray. You're not just a file in a cabinet. You'll be part of the board, advising on design, providing feedback on prototypes, and even attending innovation panels. You created something clever. Let's assist the world in using it." I nodded, attempting to maintain my voice steady. Voice steady, I'm in. She stood and offered her hand again. Welcome to the table. This time the shake felt different. This time I wasn't the man they barely tolerated. I wasn't the mechanic in the garage. I was the man who built something they couldn't ignore. Back at the hotel, the kids fell asleep, fast bellies, full minds quiet. I stepped out onto the balcony, looking at the glow of the city. I thought about everything it took to get here, the nights I doubted myself, the mornings I almost didn't submit the patent, the Thanksgiving in the garage. Then I remembered Clarissa's silence and how, amid all the commotion I'd lived through, that stillness had eventually liberated me. Weeks passed like a string of clean shop shifts, steady and quietly fulfilling in the best manner. 2 weeks after the interview dinner, the first licensing payment arrived. I didn't toast with champagne or purchase anything ostentatious. Instead, I paid off all my debts, leased a second space across town to grow the garage, and employed 3 young men who reminded me of myself at 20, hungry, humble, and unrefined. One of them. On his first day, I gave Damien a corporate-branded set of tools, and he almost cried. "This yours," I told him, "as long as you keep showing up with heart." He held those tools like they were gold bars. I upgraded the break room, stocked the fridge, got new tires for the tow truck, and replaced the squeaky office chair I'd been sitting on for 10 years. Nothing extravagant, just better, stronger, more stable, and then I moved us. The apartment we found wasn't huge, nor was it in a gated neighborhood or glass high-rise. It was a simple 3-bedroom in a good school district with a small front porch and a yard Ari could use for her sketching and Miles could tear up with a soccer ball. It was the first time I chose a home that was just ours, not linked to another family's name, not a performance space with curated furniture and quiet expectations, just wood windows and peace. We spent the first Saturday there unpacking boxes and ordering pizza. I let Miles choose the curtains, which he promptly regretted when he discovered they were glow-in-the-dark race cars. 3-bedroom in a good school district with a small front porch and a yard Ari could use for her sketching and Miles could tear up with a soccer ball. It was the first time I picked a home that was just ours, not tied to another family's name, not a performance space with curated furniture and silent expectations, just wood windows and peace. We spent the first Saturday. Organized the kitchen with surgical precision, rolling her eyes every time Miles misplaced a spoon. By the end of the day, the living room was cluttered with boxes, and the couch still smelled like the plastic wrap it came in, but it was perfect. That night, after I put the kids to bed, I stepped into the bathroom and stared at the man in the mirror. Same hands, same face, same short cropped hair, but something was different. I wasn't slouched, I wasn't apologizing, I wasn't trying to shrink myself to fit into someone else's life. I was standing there like a man who finally grasped his own weight, his own worth. The bathroom light caught the edge of my jaw, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to justify myself to anyone. I'd spent so long living in reaction, reacting to being dismissed, to being talked down to being underestimated. Clarissa and her family had built an entire architecture of silence around me, and I'd let them. I made excuses for their condescension. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I told myself love required patience, tolerance, humility, but love that demands you to shrink isn't love, it's control. Then came the message, "Can we meet?" Just to talk, no pressure. I agreed. We met at a diner halfway between my shop and the house she still lived in alone. She wore her softest blouse, the one I used to buy her roses to match, but her eyes were guarded. She sat like she was preparing for a deposition. She asked about the kids. I answered. She asked if I was happy. I nodded, and then she said it maybe we needed all this to see what we had. I stirred my coffee and looked her dead in the eye. "You didn't have me, Clarissa. You had a version of me. You felt better than you did, and I accepted that for too long." Her throat tightened. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way. You didn't make me. I chose to feel small to maintain the peace, but that was my error." She reached across the table. I didn't take her hand. "You're really done," she said softly. "Yes," I said. It wasn't cruel or dramatic. It was just final. Bitterness, no fireworks, because I wasn't seeking revenge, but rather peace in mornings that didn't begin with criticism, in evenings that concluded in laughter rather than silence, in a life that felt like mine. 1 week after the divorce was finalized, Ari assisted me in hanging the last frame in our new living room, my shop's first dollar pressed into a shadow box. Miles added a sticky note beneath the hands that created it. I stared at it. That night, fire crackling low in the background, my children asleep down the hall, and thought about how far. 1 year later, I hosted Thanksgiving in my own home, not Clarissa's family's mansion with a chandelier that cost more than my first car, not the sterile dining room where I was handed a paper plate like a punishment. This was my space, modest, warm, loud, in the best way. Real Ari baked her first pumpkin bread from scratch, carefully following a recipe she'd printed out, and decorated with doodles of turkeys and leaves. Miles. He even ironed the napkins, sort of. They were wrinkled at the corners but perfectly folded, and that's what counted. The table was wood, slightly scuffed from a second-hand store that didn't care about names. only whether you could carry it out yourself. We had 8 guests, 2 of my new shop texts and their girlfriends, our neighbor Miss Carol, who brought sweet potato pie that almost made me cry, and Damon's younger brother, whom Ari had come to love like a sibling. There were no place cards, no designer cutlery, just laughter, the aroma of roasted turkey, and the sense that everyone sitting down belonged there. There were no place cards, no designer cutlery, just laughter, the aroma of roasted turkey, and the sense that everyone sitting down belonged there. From the kitchen, I watched the room as I stirred the gravy, real gravy, not something dumped from a cannon to dry meat. The music was low, the lights soft, and for a moment I let myself absorb it all. Ari caught me looking. "You okay, Dad?" I nodded. "Better than okay." She smiled. "It's different, huh?" "Yeah," I said, "but the kind of different I wish I'd known earlier." She walked over and leaned against the counter next to me. Arms crossed like Clarissa used to, except without the judgment. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The old house. I mean." I paused, thought about the marble floors, the cold wine glasses, the way I never quite felt allowed to exhale in those walls. "No," I said. "I think what I miss is the version of me that still believed I needed their approval." Ari didn't reply, but she didn't have to. She just nodded like she understood something bigger than most kids her age. Dinner was loud, messy, perfect. Miles spilled cranberry sauce on his shirt, trying to show off his juggling skills with the bread rolls. Someone knocked over a glass. Miss Carol told a story that had the whole table cackling, and for once I wasn't the man on the edge of the room smiling tightly to keep from falling apart. I was at the center because this time I built the table myself. After everyone left and the dishes were piled high, I walked out to the porch, allowing the night air to envelop me. The stars were weak, but I located a few. Ari came out and sat next to me, tucking her legs under herself. "Think Mom's doing Thanksgiving tonight? Probably think they're still using paper plates in the garage?" I laughed, not angrily, not cruelly, just freely. "I hope not," I said, "but I also hope they learned something." She laid her head on my shoulder. "You did. What's that? You didn't simply leave their table, you established your own, and you let us sit at it." That hit me somewhere. I didn't know I still carried pain. I wrapped an arm around her shoulder. "I'll always make room for you." Silas called later that weekend to tell me the media had picked up on the story, not because of the tech, he said, because of you, the mechanic who turned a garage into a think tank. "They're calling it the limo moment." I chuckled. "Sounds dramatic." "People like reminders," he said. "Reminders that success isn't always polished, that it doesn't wear a suit, that sometimes it wears coveralls and works after everyone else has gone to bed." I looked around the house, then our home, the soft hum of the fridge, the sound of Miles in the other room laughing at some cartoon, the smell of leftover turkey in the air. "It didn't start with the limo," I told Silas. "It started with the silence. Before it." He paused. "Say more. That moment in the garage, before the headlights, when I sat there with my kids, humiliated, excluded, trying to pretend it was okay. That silence was louder than any applause I'll ever get. It told me who I was to them and who I wasn't, and I decided I'd." Silas was quiet for a beat. "You're not just building tech, Ray, you're building legacy." After we hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. Clarissa never tried to come back. "Not really. A few emails here, and they're asking if we could co-parent amicably, and if we were settling in." I answered briefly, politely, but I didn't offer bridges. I didn't need to. Some people only see value in you when others do first, and some people only see you when it's already too late. The garage had once been a place of exile, then invention. No, it was just a memory. The true story, the one that counted, was this: I stopped waiting for a seat at their table. I created my own, and this time everyone at it knew precisely who had carved the legs, laid the wood, and set each plate down with pride.